I'd like to start with a general question, because the boys deconstruct the superhero myth. Preacher tears down religion, and crossed obliterates morality in itself. So there is an ideology, a myth, or a belief you will never touch, or either by choice or reluctance, and why, if so?
Well, first of all, I'm not completely sure that crossed obliterates morality. Certainly the crossed themselves are utterly immoral. I mean, they're human cruelty personified, but to me, every cross story is really about the survivors. It's really about the few human beings who are trying to exist in that world and are trying to avoid the crossed, occasionally fight them, mostly avoid them, and hang on to their own humanity while doing so. If you look at the original story, it's the feeling that the survivors get that they themselves are becoming inhuman that scares them the most, and that's when they decide to try and do something about it, to hang on to their humanity. As to beliefs that that I attack, the boys, yes, it's about superheroes, but it's also about corporate power and government corruption. It was written at the time of the George W. Bush presidency, where you saw the illegal invasion of Iraq, you saw an increase in government power, and you saw the absolute lack of response to the Hurricane Katrina disaster, which really was a betrayal of the citizens' trust. And yet, of course, compared to what we have now, it's nothing. You couldn't possibly have predicted what we have now in those terms. It's taken everything that I was worried about with the boys and magnified it about 1 million times. And as for religion, well, religion is always going to be something I regard with extreme suspicion, because to me it's simply belief in magic. It's intrinsically, I see no more reason to take it seriously than people who dress up and come to this convention as characters from Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. Them I respect, because I'm pretty sure they know where reality ends where fantasy ends and reality begins. But unfortunately, practitioners of the world's religions do not have that understanding, and the world suffers as a result. Is there anything else I would like to have a go at? Is there anything else I would like to attack? Probably. I mean, the situation I described where we have the Trump government in the US, which is corrupt to a degree that you wouldn't have thought possible. I mean, that's going to give me plenty to write about.
And have you ever think about attacking something else besides the Western civilization? Or is it because you know well the Western civilization?
Yeah, I mean, I am of the Western civilization, and I've seen its successes and I've seen its failures. So obviously, that's paramount to me. Beyond that, Chinese communism, the Muslim world, and whatever's going on in Russia, which seems to be a sort of gangster state. Plenty to write about there.
You're never
never short of things to write about.
Yeah, exactly. So in Crossed, violence becomes so extreme it turns almost abstract in a way.
Right. Yeah.
In the boys, it's political and personal. And in your view, when does brutality in storytelling lose its meaning? And have you ever censored yourself, not for decency, but just to avoid being repetitive?
No. This is obviously something where everyone draws the line individually. The violence in Crossed is really historical human violence writ large. It details, or it's drawn from the things that happen every time the gloves come off and people are given, people grant themselves permission to act as they choose. You see it in war zones when mercenaries and militias realize that there is nothing to stop them doing anything they want. The one that comes to mind is Bosnia in the 1990s. Take almost any small incident from that and look at what happened when people realized they could do anything they wanted, and then look at Crossed and you realize that one is simply drawn from the other. So there's, in a way, there's nothing particularly inventive about Crossed because all the inventiveness has already been done by people in those terrible, terrible situations. The Boys is, a lot of The Boys has to do with the kind of random violence of cruel, indulgent people who are again given the chance to, given the opportunity to do anything they want. That's the superheroes. The violence of the boys themselves, and Butcher in particular, is very much the violence of vengeance. It's frustration unleashed. It's getting your hands on the person who did the terrible thing to the people you care about. I always thought of the boys as the violence as the kind of thing that would happen outside a pub or a bar at 4 o'clock in the morning when people are a bit tanked up, the gloves are off, and the cops haven't gotten there in time, and they're out of control in a different way. That's the kind of the violence that the boys themselves deliver. And I think I probably chose to do that just because it's so unlike violence in most superhero comics, which has a sort of it's almost like a ballet, like a choreographed dance. When Batman gets into a fight with a bunch of muggers, for instance, they of course are blundering, they're untrained, they're probably high on drugs. He of course is the world's greatest hand-to-hand combat expert, and he knows exactly how to use just the perfect amount of force in each instance, using each opponent's force against them, letting them defeat themselves. I wanted to do the opposite of that and show what happened when a bunch of people get a guy on the ground and they simply just kick him into pulp, because that to me is the exact opposite of what we see in superhero comics, where the thing is this almost like a dance, which has no relation to anything that's ever happened to anybody, not really.
Yeah, what happens also in Kick-Ass, in a way.
Right. I mean that's a tremendously funny film, though, and that's that over the top violence taken a bit further.
And that's why probably people get connected at those kind of comics, so different from what you expect. Because as you said, you expect Batman or whatever superhero doing this and fight, and
everything's set up so that it will work exactly the way he wants it to.
So when something else comes out, it's okay, oh, what is this? No, not that. But if you ever been into a real fight, you know that even if...
Yes, it's an incredibly random, horrible, unpleasant experience. Even people who are very, very good at it, like, for instance, boxers and mixed martial arts champions do eventually end up with all sorts of injuries that decrease their ability to function, brain damage.
Go wrong, and someone with a knife, you don't expect.
It's a random thing. It's one of the reasons we have laws to prevent it.
So Jesse Custer, Billy Butcher, even the sane survivors in Cross, they all despise power, and yet they end up wielding it in a way. So is that a critique of our times, or a diagnosis without a cure?
Well, the survivors in Crossed have very, very little power to wield. They're equipped with whatever they can carry on their backs. They can't even use vehicles because the engine sound will bring the cross down on them. If they have any power at all, it's perhaps personal power, allowing them to maintain some degree of humanity. That's what we were talking about earlier. Jesse Custer is he's very much the sort of traditional Western hero. His power, his word of God is really like a cowboy or a Western hero's six gun. And he gets into as many fist fights as he does anything else. You know, most of the time he doesn't even use the power. He just gets stuck in. So he's very much a sort of traditional hero, a slightly more violent traditional hero. Butcher, on the other hand, Butcher is the bad man who fixes the world. If we say that bad men break the world, it's also bad men who fix it, because, as has been said, good men will not do the terrible things that are necessary to fix the problem, whereas a bad man will not have the moral limits that a good man has. I'm saying men here because usually it is men doing these things. But it's that traditional idea that you need a bit of a bastard to get the job done. And of course the trouble is, as Butcher himself says, it's what we get up to when you're not looking that you have to worry about, because he has an agenda of his own.
Last one?
Sure.
The Boys became a global hit, and yet its original cynicism remains largely intact. So what was your first reaction when one of your most ferocious works was embraced by the same mainstream culture is set out to dismantle? And did it make you laugh or worry?
Well, it made me laugh a lot. I think it was only natural that something like The Boys would come along on TV, because if you think about it, for 20, 25 years now, superheroes have gone mainstream in terms of film and television. Back in the 90s, you got a few films here and there, sort of. But it wasn't until, I suppose, they figured out how to do the effects and make a superhero film or TV look like a superhero comic. And that they were able to bring them to the screen successfully. And I think once they did that, once you had all the DC and Marvel characters on the screen, and you had educated a mainstream audience, meaning a non-comic book audience, to the idea of what we call shared universes. And you know what that's like. You're walking down the street and Spider-Man swings past, and you walk a bit further and the Hulk's on the rampage, and a bit further, and the X-Men are there fighting whoever they're fighting, and you get the idea. It's like they all live in the same world. Well, once you educate that mainstream audience to that idea, it's only a matter of time before someone says, hey, what if they're bad guys? What if they're all bastards? What if they're not heroes? What if they're only in it for themselves? It was only a matter of time before someone was going to do a show like that, and it just so happened that The Boys was there at exactly the right time. It could just as easily have been Martial Law, which is the old book from the 1980s and 90s about a guy who hunts superheroes, which is one I'm terribly fond of. It could just as easily have been something original, but The Boys was there at exactly the right moment.
So, okay, thank you very much.
No problem.